Spyro the Reignited Trilogy, the new PS1 Trilogy remake by Toys for Bob, which was bound to happen after the success of Crash Bandicoot Remaster. And the way I'll be approaching this today is Spyro as its own unique game, or 3 games, because I never played the original Spyro games, and maybe hopefully this gives me a unique perspective into these, who knows. Anyways, first we have Spyro, and I'll start by saying that if something doesn't change from game to game, then I'll not mention it in the next game. First off then, the controls. Spyro is a young dragon, and so he can run, breathe fire, he can ram things with his horns, and while he cannot fly, he can glide, which of course comes to play a lot in the platforming. In fact, if you can start by talking about the jumping and gliding of Spyro, it can feel a bit too demanding on your timings to make, especially the longer jumps. This is something that gets fixed in the sequels, but it isn't here, which is a bit of a missed opportunity for a remaster. But basically, this was the game where I died the most, and mostly because of the platforming. Which leads me to talk about the life systems, which is the same for all 3 games. You have a dragonfly next to you, and its color basically means how many hits you can take, going from yellow to blue to green, and then none, meaning if you get hit, you lose a life. And yes, if you fall down a cliff, you will just lose 1 life. Spyro 1 definitely ended up being the hardest and the one I died the most, mostly due to its tougher and bare platforming. But while Spyro 1 moveset is simple, there are still power-ups like portals that will give Spyro the power of stronger fire breath, or arrows on the ground in which, when ran in that direction, makes Spyro run faster, subsequently making his ram more powerful, but also allowing him to jump higher and longer. This works really well with the level design of this first game, which I'll talk about a bit later. Now, fighting enemies is for the most part easy. You can only really defeat enemies by either ramming them or by breathing fire on them. Some of them will be defeated by both, but usually one is more effective than the other. By that I mean, you don't get damaged by one of them in the process, as almost every enemy in this game will die in one hit, including the larger enemies. Realistically, there's only a few types of enemies, but they have a lot of reskins, and this applies to all 3 games. There are also bosses, but in Spyro 1 they are very underwhelming. They feel like mini bosses. Usually you know you're in a boss level when the enemy will run away and move and open a path to a different area when successfully attacked. It was to the point where I thought the final boss was just a mini boss before the real thing. I think the problem here is that these levels probably looked good in the PS1, but when taking them and putting them with these new graphics, you realize they don't really stand out from the other levels, which I think a boss level ought to do. There is also flying levels where you can have 2 activities, that being racing against dragonflies, which I thought was kinda boring, mostly because of how slow Spyro's flying is, which makes more sense for the other minigame in my option, the better one, where you collect various things in this map and you'll get gems, rewards, depending on how many things you can collect in each set of collectibles, and a bonus for getting all in a set, and an even bigger bonus for getting all the sets. These are also in the sequels, only difference being is that the sequels have more unique settings, and also big bonus at the end ties into the collectibles of those games, while here you just get gems. I'm saying this now so I don't have to talk about these levels again later, because I'm not a huge fan in general. But now let's talk about the more normal or core levels. The objective of Spyro 1 is to save and recover the dragons and a few dragon eggs, and they're spread around the levels, but also spread around the hub worlds. The hub worlds are these more open areas where the entries to levels are also tell the theme of the levels, and because of that, Spyro ends up being the one with the least amount of level and enemy reskin variety. But these hub worlds also end up feeling like they're actual levels, given that they have everything in them that a regular level has. They have enemies and collectibles and even power-ups in them. But now the actual levels themselves. The first game is also the more linear one, and it works in what it's trying to do. They're linear, but they're still a level of exploration, given your objective of finding the dragons. In both levels and hubs, you can also find gems. In Spyro 1, they're just gems. There really is no use for them besides collecting. Also, if I can give my opinion on the dragons, and they do somewhat fix this in the sequels, was that here they tried to make the collectible dragons have their own personalities. It is a novel attempt, but the problem is a lot of the dragons just start blending in with each other and looking and sounding alike, especially when most of them only have 1 or 2 lines of dialogue. And I think that really puts Spyro 1 in perspective to the other games. It's the most bare one and most simple one, but it has a lot of potential, and the level design is already very tight, so the potential for a sequel being good is, well, really good. Of course, no point in teasing. Here we are reviewing a trilogy remaster, and so comes Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage, which is a lot of people's favorite Spyro, and with reason. First off, there is a story. It's very much a kid's story, but it's cool that it's there. And it's through this story that a lot of new features of Spyro come to play, starting with the gems that do have some value now, as they can be used to unlock certain levels, but also more importantly, moves for Spyro. Spyro's moveset is a lot more developed now, being able to ground pound and scale certain walls, and more importantly, there is an extra jump that you can do at the end of a glide, saving you from many and arguably unfair deaths. Spyro's 2's levels are also now much more open and tend to have a circular shape to them, where the ending is very close to the beginning. This being for how Spyro's 2 has a bigger embrace of its collectathon aspect. There will be small missions within the levels that will have you doing minigames with completely different gameplay, like riding a train cart or ice skating, or just activating things that will change the dynamic of the level, or give you access to a new area. There is also a lot of hidden areas where most of these minigames take place. There is also just a much bigger abundance of portals that give you powers. Even the speed up power is now a portal. In Spyro 2, you just spend a lot more time within these individual levels, and you're incentivized to do so, as the main and most important collectible of this game, the orbs, are all spread around these levels, missions and minigames. There's also a lot more level variety. Almost every level has its setting, like a desert level followed by a robot farm level. The level hub no longer depicts the setting of these levels, and therefore the hubs are also a lot fewer, but also a lot bigger, working even more like levels than the previous games, even if they don't have enemies this time around. Thing to mention about Spyro 2 is that now you can swim as well. In Spyro 1 you died if you fell in the water, but here Spyro can both swim and dive, meaning there is also a water level, which does not change the gamer's perspective of water levels, definitely being the lowest point of this game. And finally, for Spyro 2, the boss fights. I'll be honest, Spyro 2 has the best boss fights out of the trilogy, and they're just okay. And also in Spyro 2, they take place in a boss arena, and they take the shape of more traditional boss fights, where you dodge attacks until you have some sort of opening to attack. And they're okay, definitely not the strong suit of the Spyro games. That being said though, overall Spyro 2 just feels like the essential Spyro game. It takes what makes Spyro 1 work, builds upon it to create a very cohesive collectathon platformer. I can totally see how this is a lot of people's favorite. Then we have the final one, Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon, and it's very much a sequel, as in it's Spyro 2 but bigger, literally in almost every way. Now there are just a lot more mini games and the levels seem bigger, even the story cutscenes are longer. It's a bigger game in general, except the hub worlds. Now hubs are smaller and a lot less like levels and just like hubs for, well, the actual levels, even if they do still have collectibles hidden in them. But the biggest notable change in Spyro 3 is the new playable characters. While most of the game will still be playable with Spyro, the game now has certain sections and mini games that can only be done by these new characters that you can unlock with gems as the game progresses. And these characters play very different from each other. We have a penguin with a jetpack and missiles, a giant yeti with a mace, a kangaroo that jumps high, that's the most normal one out of them all, and a monkey with a gun. They only show up a few times, and to me, who played through all of the 3 games in a few days, this felt good. It was a nice change of pace for someone who had been running with Spyro for so many hours. There is also, I would like to mention, a skateboarding minigame. It's not Tony Hawk, but it is fun, and again a nice change of pace. That's kind of the thing with Spyro 3, it's a change of pace. And for fans of the series, especially back in the day, having to wait for this game to come out and not just play it right after 2, that could have been a bit annoying. But that's not the context here, and here I really enjoyed that change. Now, is it my favorite Spyro? I don't know, time will tell. I'm definitely leaning towards 2, especially since the bosses here are a step down from 2, which already didn't have great boss fights. But the level design in general is just as good as, well, all of the 3 games. All the movesets from 2 are here, and most of them you don't even have to pay and are just unlocked from the beginning, which is great. It really feels like a direct sequel. And that brings me to talk about the overall games and the technical side that they all share. Soundtrack wise, this game has a very bouncy and catchy sound, and it goes really well with the upbeat levels. In general, they're really good, even if I'm definitely not gonna be listening to these outside of the game. Graphics wise though, this game looks amazing. Its cartoony style is really on point. I'm sure the furries had a field day when this came out. Honestly, the only thing I see aging badly is the vegetation, which is also a bit of an annoyance as it has an habit of hiding gems. But everything else is so well in that exaggerated cartoon style, kinda like how Ratchet & Clank character design still have aged really well. It just looks really good. And because of the things I said in this review, yes, that's how reviews work, well at least mine do, I came to the score of 8 out of 10. It is a lot of game for a remaster. It's a trilogy after all, and it would take you about 20 hours to beat all 3 games, and of course even longer to 100% or 120%, which is a thing in this game. And you might want to do that because these are, after all, collectathon games, and they're very enticing in that way. And as a recommendation, you can play this pretty much on any current console, so its availability is pretty good. It's even on the Switch. In terms of price, this is a full-fledged game, but it's also a 2-year-old game at this point, so you can find it easily for under $30, especially during sales, so just be aware of that if you consider buying it. And regardless of that decision, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting. All of these are free things you can do, and regardless of that, I hope you have a nice day. And goodbye.